On New Year's Eve, my husband backtracked and refused to go to my family's home. Frustrated, I argued with him, and to my astonishment, he viciously beat me up. I came to my senses and began to fight back. 01. Daryl and I had fallen in love naturally. We worked for the same company, but in different departments. One day, we met while collaborating on the same project. That was when Daryl fell for me, head over heels. He went out of his way to win my affection. At 28, I wasn't getting any younger, and my parents were pressing me to settle down. They even threatened to set me up with someone if I didn't bring home a boyfriend for the holidays. Daryl, tall and broad-shouldered with a bright, charming demeanor, had exactly the look that melted my heart. It didn't take long for me to agree to date him. We dated for 2 years, meeting each other's families during that time. Eventually, under pressure from both sides, we tied the knot. This year marked our first New Year's as a married couple. As a daughter living away from home, I couldn't help but yearn to spend the holidays with my parents. So I suggested to Daryl that we visit his family first, then head to my parents' place in Oakridge on December 31. Initially, Daryl wasn't thrilled with the idea, but my persistent coaxing won him over. To sweeten the deal, I bought him the gaming console he'd been eyeing for months, but had been too frugal to buy. Once he had that console, a grin never left his face. With the plans finalized, I threw myself into getting everything ready for the trip. Finally, on December 24th, we packed up the car and drove to Dry Creek, KY, where Daryl's family lived. His parents and sisters were delighted to see us, especially since I had thoughtfully prepared expensive gifts for everyone. The first few days at their house were pleasant. Then came December 31. I didn't want to risk getting stuck in a traffic jam, so on December 30th, I loaded everything we'd need for my parents' house into the car. That night, I encouraged Daryl to get a good night's rest so we could hit the road early. The thought of reuniting with my family after 6 months filled me with so much joy that I couldn't sleep. The alarm rang early, and I sprang out of bed. Daryl was still asleep, so I gently woke him up. "Babe, I'm going to wash up. You should get up too, freshen up, and we'll grab a quick bite before heading out." I was too excited to notice the odd expression flickering across his face. After washing up and getting dressed, I waited for a long while, but Daryl didn't come out. By the time I checked the clock, it was already 9:30 a.m. Worried about holiday traffic, I went back to the bedroom to wake him. When I opened the door, I found Daryl burrowed under the covers, snoring so loudly it could shake the walls. Peeling back the blanket, I saw the dark circles under his eyes and remembered how hard he'd worked preparing for the holidays. Feeling a twinge of guilt, I decided we could leave after lunch. Quietly, I tucked him back in and left the room. In the yard, I called my parents to let them know we'd be late and went to the kitchen to prepare lunch. 02. After lunch, I began urging Daryl to start driving me back to my parents' place. "Everything's packed. You just need to drive," I said, grabbing his arm and leading him toward the car. "It's a long trip, but you can drive the first leg. When we get to a rest area, we'll swap, and I'll take over. That way, we won't get too tired, and we might even make it in time for dinner." I was so caught up in my excitement that I didn't notice the growing irritation on Daryl's face. As we approached the yard gate, he suddenly pulled his arm away and bellowed, "I'm not going." The force of his words stunned me. I froze for a moment, staring at him in disbelief. "What did you say?" I stammered. His face was etched with frustration. Without sparing me a glance, he repeated, "I said, I'm not going," and turned to walk back into the house. I hurried after him, grabbing his arm again. "Daryl Whittaker. What do you mean, you're not going? You promised we'd spend New Year's at my parents' house. What's this all about?" He yanked his arm free and snapped, "I said I'm not going because I don't feel like it. Can't you understand that?" He stormed off, leaving me standing there, stunned by his blunt dismissal. As I watched him walk away, realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The promise to spend New Year's Eve with my family had been a lie. He had lured me to Dry Creek, far from my parents in Oakridge, knowing I'd be trapped. Without the car keys, and with the holiday rush making it impossible to buy a bus ticket, I had no way of leaving. It was all a calculated move to ensure that I had no choice but to stay here for New Year's. Fury welled up inside me. I charged toward him and kicked him hard in the leg. "Daryl Whittaker, you planned this, didn't you? You never intended to visit my parents, did you? You lied to me." Daryl winced but quickly switched tactics, his tone softening as he tried to pacify me. "Savannah, think about it. Around here, no married woman goes back to her parents for New Year's. It's tradition for wives to stay with their in-laws." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's not how my family works. My parents, my brother, and my sister all want me to come home. Just because your family doesn't want their daughters back doesn't mean mine feels the same way." Seeing that I wasn't backing down, Daryl tried again, this time appealing to my sense of fairness. "Savannah, if you leave, what will people here think? What will they say about me? About my parents? Can't you just give me this 1 year? Stay here, for my sake." "Your sake?" I snapped, glaring at him. "Your reputation? That's what this is about. You agreed to go, and now you're backing out. You're shameless." Daryl's expression darkened, but he admitted, "If I hadn't agreed, you would have argued endlessly. So yeah, I said yes to keep you quiet." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Are you seriously trying to pin this on me?" I demanded. To my shock, he nodded. "Well, yeah. Who else am I supposed to blame, Savannah?" A laugh bubbled out of me, bitter and furious. "Daryl Whittaker, you have the nerve to blame me for your lies? You're unbelievable." Before I could say more, a commotion drew my attention. Daryl's parents, Marlene and Clyde, along with his sisters, Brenda and Josie, poured out of the house. Their expressions ranged from smug satisfaction to thinly veiled disdain. Clearly, they'd overheard the argument. Daryl's ego couldn't take the hit. His face twisted in anger, and before I could react, he slapped me across the face. The force of the blow left me reeling, tears springing to my eyes. "You're no man," I yelled, clutching my stinging cheek. Furious, I raised my hand to strike back, but he grabbed my wrist and twisted it sharply. Pain shot through my arm. Before I could cry out, a heavy blow landed on my head. The world spun, and my vision blurred. The fireplace poker he'd swung at me clattered to the ground as I crumpled. The moment I hit the dirt, his kicks and punches started raining down. "You don't listen," he shouted. "You had to keep pushing me. You're desperate to go back to Oakridge? Why? Got a lover waiting for you? You're nothing but trouble." I curled into a ball, shielding my head with my hands, trying to endure the relentless assault. Amid the chaos, I heard his family's voices, loud and gleeful. "Teach her a lesson, Daryl. Women need to know their place." Marlene crowed. "Don't hit her too hard, son. You don't want her too bruised for tonight," Clyde added, laughing cruelly. "She needs this," Brenda chimed in. "Who does she think she is, trying to go back to her parents' house? Hit her harder, Daryl," Josie yelled. "If she's still moving, you're not doing it right." Their taunts echoed around me as I lay there, battered and broken. It was in that moment I realized the full extent of the nightmare I'd walked into. This family wasn't just cruel, they were monsters. I tried to push myself up, to fight back, but the dizziness overwhelmed me. The first blow to my head must have caused a concussion. My vision swam, and darkness crept in. As my consciousness slipped away, I heard their laughter, loud and unrelenting, as they returned to the house. I was left alone in the yard, discarded like trash. 03. The winter wind bit into my skin like icy needles, making every part of me ache. The cold night air held through the yard as I slowly opened my eyes. It was a moonless, star-filled night. I was still lying in the corner of the Whitakers' yard, abandoned and forgotten. Inside the house, Daryl's family was gathered, enjoying their New Year's Eve dinner and watching the ball drop on TV. The pain radiating from my body brought me fully back to my senses. I tried to move, wincing as I propped myself up against the corner of the wall. The sting in my head and the bruises on my body were made worse by the bitter wind cutting through my clothes. I was cold to my core, inside and out. That's when everything became clear. The Whitakers weren't just cruel. They were monsters. They had stood by as Daryl beat me, egging him on, as if my suffering were a spectator sport. This was their way of showing me my place. In their eyes, now that I was married to Daryl, I belonged to him, and by extension, to them. If I dared to resist their rules, they'd punish me however they wanted. I wasn't a wife to them. I was their servant, their obedient daughter-in-law, their personal ATM. I looked through the window at their cheerful gathering. Holding onto the wall for support, I moved as silently as possible. Fortunately, Daryl's bedroom was far enough from the dining room that they couldn't hear me. I crept into his room, my fingers trembling as I rummaged through his clothes. Finally, I felt the cold metal of the car keys in his pocket. With the keys secured, I grabbed my phone and purse. In the dark, I slipped back out of the bedroom and toward the main gate. Luckily, the gate wasn't fully shut, just left slightly ajar. I nudged it open just enough to squeeze through, keeping as quiet as possible.